This is a 102.7 FM Toowoomba original podcast.
Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for tuning in. You're on Big Little Small Talk and my name's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan. Today we have our guest. Her name is Barbara Ryan. Well, she's actually Associate Professor Dr. Barbara Ryan, and she is the founder of the Cicada Research and Communication Foundation?
It's just a company.
All right. Now, Barb, your specialty and what you've done your PhD in is so fascinating, and it's how people get information in a disaster. Have I got that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So sort of tell me about the genesis of this. Where did it come from?
Yeah, okay. I have always worked in communication. I started life as a journalist and then I went through a number of communication jobs and I ended up at Toowoomba City Council. And a few people listening to this will remember the 2002 bushfires that we had down the range just before the terrible Canberra bushfire in 2003. And as part of the Disaster Management Act in Queensland at that point, council comms teams would look after communication around any natural hazard that occurred. It might be a flood, cyclone, fire. And so my whole team shifted over to the local disaster management group. And we looked after all of the media inquiries, the public meetings and so on around those fires. They'd been going for 3 weeks. But we got involved in the last week as the fire sort of got closer and closer to Toowoomba. And on the Sunday at the end of the week, we're sitting around the local disaster management group table up in the council chambers there. And the incident controller's telling us we're going to lose houses today. And it just sort of made, I still feel a thing in my stomach when I hear that it's, going to get from, just unthreatening flames to taking down people's favourite places. So anyway, luckily that day it rained, so that was the end of the whole thing. And after that I moved over to the university to work to teach public relations, and one of the requirements of that job is to have a PhD, and I needed a topic. So I was sort of thinking, I'd always wondered, we did a lot of radio interviews. I think we were on the radio every 15 minutes or so during that period. Are we telling people the right thing, and are they getting the information they need? And where are they getting their information from? So that's why I decided to do that PhD. And it was an amazing topic. It took me 9 years.
As these things tend to do.
Small children and I'd sort of pledged that I wouldn't do it on weekends when they were doing sport and all those sorts of things. And I was doing it part-time. And then I had supervisor change halfway through and things like that. But I got there, but I never fell out of love with that topic. And whenever I talk to people about it or what I do, everyone has an amazing story about something that they've done or experienced or been through that just lets me know that it's such a great topic to be looking into.
Because that was such a scary time. The houses at Prince Henry Heights were being threatened and the cinders were going as far as Harristown, I think that was right. So what was the conclusion? Where do people get their information from?
I was a bit unlucky because I was doing my PhD as social media was coming on board. So I didn't finish my PhD till 2017, and the 2011 floods were when Queensland Police really kicked off how agencies use social media to let people know what's happening. And I sort of hadn't got to the plateau of where people use social media. So at that point, it was still relevant, but the number one source for information is other people first. And so now that's probably transferred over to social media. Whereas when I was doing surveys and interviews, it was really, go and see your neighbour and talk to your mum and call people up. And then the second was TV, because TV and now social media can give you the picture of what's happening, and that helps people comprehend exactly whether this is serious enough for them to have to do something, or is their family affected, and that type of thing.
Yeah. What about the local ABC, which we always seem to have in our mind as the, the gold standard of local information?
I think that program with the ABC's emergency management team has been going for so long now that it's much more automatic that people will turn to the ABC for the information. I think probably a problem we're going to face is that we're going to have multiple hazards happening all at the same time, and the ABC, like in the 2019-2020 bushfires, is not going to be able to cope with all of that, but they still are one of the best sources because quite often power goes down, you can't get onto Facebook, the ABC is still there, and we still, in my job as a volunteer community educator with the Fire Brigade, we still tell people make sure you've got a battery operated radio in your emergency kit.
And just then, so it wasn't part of your PhD, but like sort of just being in that space still, talk to me about social media, like about sort of information, disinformation, how reliable is it?
Yeah, I've just sort of been getting into this topic fairly steadily over the last couple of years, and I sort of, I think all of us in emergency management have this perception that we have a fairly high trust factor between the community and our emergency agencies, especially the volunteer agencies like RFS and SES. And I think we sort of didn't think disinformation would affect us, but I've been doing a bit of research on what's been happening around the world. And for instance, in Kerala in India in 2018, there was a massive flood. And there was fake news reports. So fake news is where someone set up a website as a news site and they put up all this rubbish, but they look like real news stories. There was a fake news story about a dam burst in one valley. That valley wasn't flooding. The next valley was, and hundreds of people evacuated into the flood to get away from what they thought was going to be a flooded valley on their side of the mountain. And so the Indian authorities don't know how many people they lost, but they are pretty sure that a number of people died because of that fake news.
Do you have any idea of why people would do that?
Yeah, there's a few reasons. Financial gain, and the financial gain is the monetary factor that's built into social media platforms. So the number of clicks you get drives monetary payment. So some people can earn $15,000 a month just by driving traffic to their website or getting people to click. So we call that the clickbait financial incentive. And scammers in recovery, they'll be fundraising, and it's actually not fundraising, it's ripping people off. So that's the financial side. Then there's ideological, and that's really bad faith actors who are either politically motivated or are motivated by an ideology such as China and Russia and communism. So China and Russia are probably our biggest factories of disinformation, and it's really easy to think, oh well, they won't, Australia will fly under the radar, but we know that those two countries and India have been identified by ASIO as sowing seeds of division in the community, and that's their purpose. So that's sort of the ideological side. And then they're just the trolls.
Specifically in this disaster,
things like Red Cross has really copped it lately. That's probably more the trolls, which is the third set of creators of disinformation. They just do it to get a laugh and get reactions. The Red Cross has had a lot of trolling in terms of, they raise all this money and then they don't disperse it immediately. But we know from the research that recovery takes 30 years. Mental recovery can take between 10 and 30 years. And even physical recovery and getting back to where you were before the disaster can take a hell of a long time. And so the Red Cross holds money back. But the trolls really get into them about holding, not dispersing all of the donations that have come in over that period of time. And it was really evident after the 2019-2020 bushfires.
Yeah, wow, that is so interesting. So do people need different information or different sources of information depending on what type of disaster it is, whether it's a fire, a flood, or earthquake? Or
unfortunately, we tend to point people to the different agencies for different hazards. Some states, Victoria for instance, has got one central platform for all of their disaster news, but not many countries or states have that. So we have to rely on people who've never been in this faced this type of hazard before, knowing to go to this particular agency's webpage to get the truth. Generally, the agencies won't tell you this, but local community Facebook pages that you've been a member of forever, you can generally trust the information that's coming from the admins of those pages, especially if they're quoting the agencies or pointing you to the agency pages.
What are the agencies?
So
are you talking about the BOM and...
Yeah, Queensland, we've got BOM, Queensland Fire Department, so they take care of urban fires and bushfires. And then SES looks after flood and cyclone. So local councils actually look after those at the grassroots level, but SES will pass those on. But the central point for everyone is probably the local council's disaster dashboard, because that draws in all of the information from around the place. The problem with that is when a disaster gets really big, it covers many different local council boundaries, and so it's really hard for people to keep track of what dashboards they need to be on to work out what's happening in certain areas and, you know, road closures and that type of thing. And of course then there's the Main Roads website, you go to that. So there's multiple different avenues of information, and when someone's really stressed, they can't think properly. So it's really hard for them to know that they've got 5 different websites or Facebook pages to check. They really need something all in one.
So you mentioned earlier about being part of the local disaster management group, and now you've just said that most councils... Will all councils have a dashboard? That's your safest thing. If you just can't think of anything, just go to a dashboard?
Yeah, it's they're required to have one,
right.
Have a dashboard. So all councils have dashboards, and they all seem to follow the same format. So I'd say that it's been made fairly easy for even the smallest councils to be able to put that together.
Now, you so much sort of invested in this topic that you and others formed the Emergency Media and Public Affairs.
Yeah.
Tell me something more about that.
So that's a 20-year ago project now. It's when I first started doing my PhD and we'd come out of those bushfires, I contacted what was Queensland Fire Department about 5 different department names ago. Community Safety, I think it was then. And I talked to their communication people about a disaster communication plan for the city. And talking to this fellow, Peter Reekers, he's really passionate about communication. And I just said, we should really, we should have something where communicators can get together and really talk about it, especially cross-state, because everyone in those days did everything differently. He said, I know a bloke who can help with that in Canberra, and so the EMPA just started from there. And we have our 20th conference this week.
Right.
So,
okay. Are you lecturing?
No, I'm doing a workshop on disinformation. So there is a way of getting ahead of it. Instead of just trying to come around and fact check and make sure everyone's got the right information after some disinformation's been put out, there's a way for organisations to get ahead of it, and so I'm going to do a workshop on that.
Yeah. So what sort of people are coming to the conference?
They're all communicators or community engagement people from different agencies.
Right. And what is the way to get in front of it?
To have been involved in some really interesting disaster usually, or have a really interesting topic. Like disinformation's on everyone's conference programs at the moment, because I think emergency managers are starting to realise that, it hasn't hit us badly yet. We've had little minor stuff happening, but one day it's going to have consequences. So
we were talking before, Barb, about the fires here in 2002, and I guess a whole other spin-off is the control burns and how you feel about that. But there was a sort of really memorable moment, wasn't there, with a cockatoo? Tell me about that.
A number of houses in Prince Henry Heights were evacuated during the fires, and there was an evacuation centre at Toowoomba Grammar, and pets were allowed. And we've discovered, with the science, if people can't take their pets, they're more likely to stay in their home. So it was great that they could open that to pets. And there was this cockatoo there, I can't remember his name, but he had down pat the Nokia ring phone, and everyone had Nokias, everyone had the same ringtone, and this cockatoo would just let it go, and then he'd go For everyone listening, I'm nodding my head. You know how cockatoos do,
Yes,
and they put up their comb, and he just was killing himself laughing. It was so funny, and everyone's patting their pockets and looking around to see whose phone it was. Yeah, very funny.
I can't imagine the level of PTSD, like even not for people just who have been through a disaster, but for people like you who were running on so much high energy.
You do run on
did you love
adrenaline.
it?
I think no PTSD for me and my team, because we actually never got close to the flames and we didn't have any terrible consequences to deal with. But I do feel for people like ABC announcers. I've heard lots of stories about announcers in the 2019-2020 bushfires who people were calling them to tell them what was happening, but also telling them that they were stuck in their house and it was too late to leave, and some of those people died, and the ABC presenters were completely traumatized by that. So there is we can say that we're a bit removed being communicators, but there is a bit of trauma, especially when you get into the recovery side of community engagement, where you're dealing with people who are completely at a loss as to how it happened, what happened, and are extremely traumatized. It's very hard because you have to be really careful you don't make things worse for them.
I'll just remind the listeners that you're on 102.7 FM. This is Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're talking to Barb Ryan, who is a communication specialist, among other things. So, Barb, can we talk about that? Because such a big part of natural disasters is how people feel that they've reacted to the information, and whether they made the right decision, wrong decision, poor decision. And you mentioned before about the animals, and so what sort of influences whether people, how resilient people are to a natural disaster, or whether they make good decisions, I guess?
Yeah. There are a lot of background factors that affect how you react to a disaster. It includes whether or not you've realised your home was at risk. If it's a complete surprise to you, then that scrambles your brain. Another one is whether you've done any preparation work, your family situation at the time, how capable and strong you are, but also if you're really socially connected in the community, you are not only more likely to have prepared for a flood or a fire or a cyclone, but you're also more likely to come out the other side with very little damage, depending on the severity, of course, but you will come out better than many other people who weren't prepared. And also, interestingly, people who are proactive about their mental health will cope better and they will emerge the other side much better too. There's a whole range of factors, but they're probably the key ones. But the biggest one is that people who have prepared, they've got a plan and they've actually practiced the plan, they're the ones who are going to be quite capable during the disaster, and they will, because they practice. It's like anything, as a firefighter, we practice all the time, and so it becomes more and more second nature to you, and we stop worrying about fire, and it's easy for us to put the pump on, and we know what that fire behaviour is going to do. Just like that, you need to have a practice for your house, whether or not you're going to evacuate or stay and defend. I've talked to lots of people who tell me, I'll say, are you going to evacuate or are you going to stay? And they say, oh, we'll just evacuate. Like it's going to take 5 minutes to put everything together and leave. But, you try and put your cat in the cage and they can sense the stress and they disappear. And then your brain's getting physiologically reacting to the stress. It shuts down and draws all of the blood away from your unnecessary organs like digestion and that type of thing. And it gives you tunnel vision. You hear lots of people talk about tunnel vision when they're in a highly stressful incident, and it stops you from making good decisions. So the idea is to make those decisions before it actually arrives on your doorstep, and then it's all sort of second nature for you. You've got all of your valuable documents, your precious documents, you've got a hard drive with all your photos, you've got the precious portraits from last century or the century before, and you've got your cat in a box, and you've got their food, and you've got dogs are organised, and if you've got horses, you've practiced under pressure because they're in incredibly intuitive, and they will freak out the minute you start trying to put pressure on them if you haven't practiced. So, and it's a really good idea to be timing that practice and including the whole family in that practice too, so everyone knows what they're doing.
And their job. Do you recommend, even for people like me who live on the side of a hill, that you have some sort of flood plan, bushfire plan, like everything?
Yeah, generally you'll be prone to one particular incident. Here the main things for us are, well, we've had some people will be in the path of flood, but mostly Toowoomba is bushfire and storm. In 1984 we had a massive storm that a hailstorm that just wrecked houses, and yeah, it was terrible. And so it's a really good idea as the season's coming up, because the seasons are different. Bushfires from July to probably October, and then storm seasons October to whenever, just to have a plan like that, and to make sure, especially in bushfire, that you've got somewhere to evacuate to and several different routes to go to. I have somewhere in town to put my horses, and my friend up on the range, she'll take in the dogs and the cat. So we have a plan and we know how we're going to do it. And we also have a plan if our road's cut off and we can't get out. So we'll go up the other end to a house that's got no timber around it anywhere. So
you said before about standardisation between states, and are there policies that are consistent now between the states and between countries?
Yeah, between states, yes, in Australia, but not between countries. The pictures are really different between all of the countries. So, for instance, in Australia, each state has one department to cover the whole state. So if we have a massive incident, we might have 8 agencies present at that incident. At when the Twin Towers were destroyed in 2001, there were over 380 agencies responded to that, just from New York and New Jersey. So that's quite a difference. But we're lucky in Australia. We've also they talk a lot, and things are coordinated a lot, but it's not because they get together. It's because they've got this organisation, umbrella membership organisation, so to speak, it used to be called the Australasian Fire Authorities Council. I think it includes emergency management now in the name. And it's really well funded through membership fees, and it does things like make sure the technology of the radios talk to each other, make sure that all of the warning signs say the same thing around all of the states. Those half circle signs that go from green to red?
Yeah.
So those new lighted up ones are a result of the work that this organisation's done, getting the states to all talk. It took about 8 years to get that format sorted, and it arose from the 2009 bushfires in Victoria. They had, I think, 5 different categories, and they just didn't suit the time. It just went off the scale of even catastrophic in terms of weather conditions. So they decided they'd have to do something and standardise everything. And of course, in the floods, Eastern Australian floods, 2022 I think that was, Victoria and New South Wales had terrible problems with the agencies talking with each other on the Murray River. So people who lived on one side of the river and did all of their business on the other side weren't able to get the right information, and they weren't able to move around where they needed to, and that type of thing. It was very difficult. So yeah, but that's improving all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas places like Portugal, for instance, they're very in the infancy stage of their coordinated emergency management, and they're sort of forced to now because they're having so many bushfires. They call them wildfires, and just in February they had 2 massive storms that had names, similar to we name our cyclones. Some of the storms they have over there get so bad that they get a name.
Is that why we have a name for, or how does it work? Is it just to differentiate one from the last?
Because at one point, I think it was last year, we had 4 going on sort of in the above the northern part of Australia, so it was really good to be able to differentiate them. And names are a really good way of going, because if you give them a number or something like that, nobody's going to retain that information.
Yeah. I sort of alluded to it before about the back burning or the natural burns and things. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that? Back
burns and we call them permit burns or prescribed burns. Backburning is a tool that we use during a fire, and it's really useful. In Queensland, we have to go through a whole process to get approval to run a backburn, and they look at the weather and all of that sort of thing. Prescribed burns are happening all the time, and I'm planning one for our brigade at the start of June. But the science is actually out on how well prescribed burns do defend us against fire, and it comes down to the country, the vegetation, the weather. The vegetation in particular, some responds well to burning so that it's not so flammable if a fire comes through, but other types of vegetation actually get worse if we burn. So we've got to learn a lot more about that, but until we do get clear guidance on that, we just, at local fire brigades, will keep doing prescribed burns.
Because isn't the problem that it goes through the tree canopy a lot of the time if it's really raging?
Yeah,
rather
so
than burning underneath?
We have what we call the ladder effect, and it gets into the canopy when there's a lot of rubbish underneath and banked up against the trees. So, and especially the stringy bark is shocking for it, because it'll have bark that just hangs nearly to the ground and goes up into the tree. And once it gets into the canopy, then it's really difficult to control. So the idea of the prescribed burn is to get rid of all of that rubbish underneath. And even the indigenous burning process, there are certain plants that the Indigenous people, First Nations people, won't burn. For instance, the undersea oaks and that type of thing. I went to one workshop where the fellow who was taking it said, well, we don't burn under these. Even though there are pine needles all over the place, he said they'll survive, they'll be good. But the rest of the forest in that point we would burn. And it was we're really into cool burns at the moment.
Tell me, what is a cool burn?
Cool burn is burning earlier in the year, so things aren't so dry, the soil's not dry, the weather's cooler, and it just trickles through the forest. I think not everyone in fire brigades are happy with that process because it's slow and it doesn't produce an instant result, and particularly in a volunteer environment where we only have a few hours on a weekend to help out. We don't want to be spending 2 days doing a burn that's going really slowly, but it really is an effective way of doing it because it gets rid of all of the stuff that really needs to be got rid of. It doesn't affect the insects and wildlife because they have time to get out of the area. And there's also a strict protocol around the timing of burns because you shouldn't be burning when something's fruiting or that type of thing. So we're still learning a lot about that, and Queensland Fire Department's been doing a bit of work in that area. So I think the knowledge will trickle down eventually and we'll be able to incorporate both techniques.
Is there a lot of weight put on the Indigenous knowledge?
Yes.
And increasingly?
Across the industry, there are First Nations presenters at nearly every conference, and they have a lot of respect within the agency. There's always going to be old school people who prefer not to take up that knowledge, but agencies are employing First Nations people in their bushfire mitigation teams. So in the southwest region here, we've got a First Nations fellow who looks after the bushfire mitigation team, so to speak. And yeah, so I think that knowledge is sort of becoming more mainstream for us.
If you've just tuned in, you're on Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're talking to Barb Ryan, who is a communication specialist in disaster management. Now, tell me, Barb, what is the paradox of the positive?
Oh my gosh, you've done your homework. So, yes, some friends and I did a research project where we interviewed every emergency agency in Australia, the community engagement teams. And one of the things that came out of our discussions with them wasn't even part of the research question, it was just jumped out of nowhere, was the situation where agencies promote their infrastructure, trucks, flood boats, whatever, and that gets all the media attention and the political capital, and infers to the community that we're going to be there, we'll rescue you, we're so capable, we've got all this equipment. And then the community engagement team is trying to say, there's not going to be a fire truck for every house, you have to get ready, you have to take on the responsibility and look after your stuff in case we can't get there. And so that's the paradox, is the communication teams are pushing all of the really good news and the acquisitions and the money spent, and then the community engagement teams coming in behind saying, no, we're not going to be there. You can't rely on it. You have to do as much as you can to prepare yourself.
Because you have written a book, have you not, on preparedness, and you say that you're constantly within your own fire brigade, your rural fire service, trying to push this notion of preparedness.
Yeah.
And you touched on it before.
Yeah. So I'm in the process of the book. I'm up to chapter 4 and there are 15 chapters.
Why does there have to be 15 chapters?
Oh, just the number of topics I needed to cover.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It's a book I'm writing. It's Routledge, the publisher, are textbook publishers, but I'm writing this for people like me who are volunteers on the ground, so they can not know anything about community engagement and how to motivate people to get ready, and they can pick up this book and get some ideas. So the book is really about the process of getting people to understand their risk, which is the number one step, and then helping them understand what they need to do to get ready and keep their family and keep their animals and their property safe. And it's quite an involved process, and we tend to put it all on the volunteers, all on the shoulders of volunteers who might come from teaching, or they might be a plumber who's got an injury and then they can't do firefighting, and so they don't have much knowledge. And there is a process of a lot of psychology involved in getting people to really take responsibility and get ready. And if we can get them to the point where they've written a plan, then we know that we've just about done our job.
Whose responsibility is it? How are you going to be the most effective with that? How are you going to get that out to most people? You need to have a plan, and then not just come up when it's really raining and or the bushfires are on everyone's top of mind.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question.
Council, is it?
All of the agencies should be working together, and unfortunately it's a face-to-face thing. So we if we get out as much as we can and meet people and talk with them, that's when they're more likely to think, oh, this is serious, I'd better go and do something. Can be supported by mass communication, but generally only after people have met face-to-face with someone from the council or the fire brigade or the SES and realise that their property is at risk. So once they've understand the risk, they're much more likely to get ready. And unfortunately, that understanding risk is a face-to-face conversation in most cases.
Wow.
Yeah, so community engagement is really, really important. And that's why I'm writing the book, because it's all about being comfortable in face-to-face conversations and being able to hold workshops so that people can come along and learn what they need to do and that type of thing.
Now, you said before about your horses. You love your horses, don't you? Almost as much as you love your rugby and playing rugby. I'm not sure whether you still play rugby, do you?
No. I think I played for one season and then I was pregnant. So that sort of put an end to everything.
You say that what position did you play on the rugby?
I'm a hooker, because I was so slow. They didn't really know what to do with me, so hooker was a pretty safe bet.
So let's talk about your horses, because you use your horses as a form of meditation. Tell me about that.
I have a dressage horse and a companion for her. And dressage is a really complicated sport. It's like really advanced gymnastics, but with two people doing the routine. And every horse is different. So you can give your signal for a canter pirouette, for instance, to one horse, and they'll completely get it and they'll do the movement. But for another horse, you've put on too much signal and they'll panic and get really tight, and then that will ruin the quality of the movement. And you are using left leg, left foot, left ankle, right ankle, hands, both sides. You're using your back muscles. You've got to be conscious of where the position of your spine. Your buttocks are part of the signal sequence. So there's, like 16 different components you can use for a signal. And you really have to concentrate every minute of your ride. So it completely takes my mind away from anything else. And it's as good as meditation. And I've been reading some research lately that dressage in particular is really good for your brain health, because you are working your brain so hard on an intellectual and a physical level to keep everything happening. And it's with every stride, because the horse might change something in a stride, or you might shift your left buttock slightly in
I'm
place.
laughing when you say buttock. It's just childish. Keep going.
And so, for instance, I had a problem at one point with my horse. In dressage, you always trot in or you canter in, depending on what level you are. Trot in and you halt at X, which is dead centre of the arena. And you do, all the horse's feet should be square and the horse should be straight looking at the judge. I would go trot in, we'd go square, and then she'd step 1 foot out. And so I said to my coach, what the hell is going on here? I just cannot get her to stand square. She watched me a couple of times and she said, your left buttock is slightly heavier than the other. And so she's thinking you want her to swing her quarters.
That is incredible.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I think you may have listened to Peter Castles, who's a saddler who I interviewed not that long ago. And how do you then get your saddle or your left buttock so that it's not giving her a signal to... is your saddle part of your...
Yes,
your
saddles
makeup
are
and your...
super important. I have had, my horse has had time off because I had a saddle that didn't fit her properly. So then we go through a process of going to a saddle fitter and they'll come up with a number of different saddles, because it has to fit her, my horse, as well as put me in a good position. And it's amazing. I've tried 6 saddles in a row and maybe 2 of them will be okay for me. 1 of them will be okay for her. Wow. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah. And I get the saddle repacked every 6 months, because in dressage she's doing more and more intensive work, so her musculature is changing, and so the saddle fit can change.
How much time would you devote to that a week?
Well, I try to ride every day, but I probably manage 4 or 5 rides a week. And I have both horses stabled, because we don't have much land, and so it's good to have them in overnight and it's not flogging the pasture. And we also have wild dogs. But yeah, probably be at least an hour in the morning, half an hour in the afternoon, and then 2 hours if I ride. So it's a lot of hours.
And
I figured out my horse would probably give me a return of 5 cents.
Yes,
on
return on investment, not so
if
good.
If I actually sold her.
Yeah. But you couldn't pay for that mental and the sense of well-being that you have, and being on the horse, being in nature.
Yeah, that's right.
You said that you studied journalism and PR, and you went up to Mount Isa Mines as part of your first job.
Yeah, I went to Mount Isa to the Northwest Star newspaper for my first job, but I did work at MIM in their comms department, communication department, while a lady was on long service leave, and that was fun. But I just found journalism, the stories were short and sharp. I'd have 12 done in a day. There was no such thing as investigative journalism in a local paper, and I just found it boring. So I occasionally would get great stories, but so when I moved to Toowoomba, I decided I would go into public relations, and I just found the whole business side of that, and how communication can contribute to business, and how it contributes to the marketing, was really, really interesting. So I switched. That's what they'll call going over to the dark side.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Right. It's not called pivoting like we all did during COVID. Well, what was your first job, Barb, that you had?
Oh, I was a sorghum roger. So that was working for seed companies who produce seed sorghum, chopping out all of those that pop their heads above the crowd and contaminating the crop, so that the seed stock was going out to farmers was pure and more likely to produce sorghum that would go into the harvester rather than all over the place.
How does one be a sorghum roger?
I think you just live in the right town, and that was
a hand?
Yeah, with
How old were you there?
Probably 14, 15.
That would have been hard work though, wouldn't it? Would it be above your head?
No, the sorghum was all about sort of 1.5 metres high. The hardest part about it was we'd often come into the crop after it had been watered, and the country around Jerilderie is pretty heavy clay, and so it was freaking hard work. We'd lose our gumboots and end up doing it in bare feet. And yeah, it was hilarious.
Can you remember what you got paid?
Oh gosh, no. But it was
$5
minuscule. Something
What
like
did you
that.
spend your money on?
Oh, I bought an SLR camera, which I don't have anymore because who develops film? And I bought horse gear, of course.
What were you like at school, Barb? What type of person were you?
I was quite an earnest, round little person. I'm thinking about my kindergarten photos where I had a fawn, I think we had a brown uniform, and I had a fawn cardigan that Mum had knitted me, buttoned right up to the neck for my photos. And a little pudding bowl, but sort of feathered a little bit round, and lots of thick hair. Not curly like it is now, but yeah, and this little round face.
And your parents had come over from the UK. Something really interesting happened to them when you got to Singapore. What was it?
The Singapore coup in 1964. So we were sitting on the tarmac for hours, and I was like a 3-month-old baby, and poor Mum, and Qantas wasn't great at dealing with children. So my mother had a 50-year grudge against Qantas.
She can hold a grudge.
Yes. She eventually forgave them when she flew back to England business class for her last trip, and they treated her like a queen. But yes, that was the grudge of all grudges.
And what was the motivation for them to come out here?
Both my parents came from families that were employed by big estates to whip a new property into shape. So the estate would buy a property and they'd ship off both sets of grandparents to wherever. They'd bring the property up to speed, and you know, I think my grandparents on my father's side were actually settled in a property. And other than the sales, the tradition was that one of the children would take over from the parents in the management of that property. And that was always the expectation with my dad. But then the property owner said that his son would take over the management of the property. And I don't know how legal this is, but my granddad at that point, he had cancer, and so he had sort of told the estate owner that this is what was going to happen, and that's how they found out that the son was going to take over. But for the 12 months up until Granddad's death, they squirreled away money from this farm, so that Dad came over with a deposit for a farm.
Oh, I see. It was your family doing the grafting.
Yes. But I don't know what sort of arrangement they had.
Right.
It could have been a share farming arrangement,
Right.
or something like that.
Yeah.
This is all the little bits
bit.
and pieces that we've collected from
Right.
different people. Yeah.
So they were able to come out here and buy a property of their own,
Yes.
were
So they were sponsored by a family who they'd started a relationship at my grandparents' stage, and so several generations had visited each other in UK and Australia. And so Dad came to them and worked for them for 2 years at Leeton in New South Wales, and then he bought a farm at Jerilderie which had nothing on it.
Right. And did you spend your whole primary school and high school living in that same house with your parents? Yeah.
Yeah, went to school at Jerilderie Public.
And Jerilderie's famous for?
Ned Kelly held up the post office.
Yeah.
And also it's fabulous merino country, so there's a big merino field days around all the studs around Jerilderie.
Fat lambs?
No, merino wool.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
right,
finest. Apart from the cold climate areas, their merinos are world class apparently.
And what did they think about you going off and doing journalism? Did they think that you would
I think they were relieved that I
right.
actually had some sort of purpose in life.
Right.
I didn't do a gap year, but I was a bit aimless, and I to the point where I'd applied for a law degree in Melbourne and I got accepted, and I thought, ooh, that's a 5-year degree. I don't want to do that. So I took the journalism offer, and I was thinking, oh, I might go and be a Jillaroo. And I could feel Dad's disappointment over the phone. And then I was going to uni in Bathurst, and the editor of the Northwest Star in Mount Isa used to be the editor in Bathurst. But he rang the college asking if there were any journalists, graduate journalists, and I thought, I'd better put in for it, and I was the only one that applied, so off I went. Yeah, and that was an adventure.
That was your first sort of paid work.
Yeah, first permanent job.
But I have a very similar story where I got stuck in Cairns and I rang my mother to ask for more money, and she said, no, you're not having any more money, you've got to start work. And so I was stuck in Cairns and I had to start work for an ophthalmologist. So,
I think I escaped that fate by this much with my fingers pressed together.
Now, you have English blood. Do you have a favourite royal? Is that part of your interest?
You warned me about this, and I'm thinking Princess Anne probably, because she's so down to earth, and of course she's into horses.
Horsey.
But she's very sensible. She's just so sensible, and I just like her because she calls a spade and tells people to piss off, and things like that.
Princess Anne, I don't really think I've ever had a Princess Anne before, so you're a first, I think, and all the time I don't think anyone's nominated Princess Anne, but perfect, really, yeah.
Nice.
And dancing, you like dancing? Is there a song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
Gosh, no.
That little girl with that little pudding hat and that reserved cardigan dancer at all?
No, but my kids are still amazed that I really like house music. And I have one playlist that is really doof house music.
Yeah.
And they can't quite get over that. And I went to a concert last year because going to a dance rave would be really on my bucket list. Or it was until last year. And I went to this concert by Rufus Du Sol, which is electronica. And it was late at night, and I'm a 8:30 to bed person. Yeah. And by 9:30 I'm thinking, when's this going to end? So I crossed that off my bucket list.
You hopefully weren't indulging in all the drugs to make you stay awake and doing all the doof dancing.
No, I probably should have though.
Did you go on your own?
No, I went with a friend who had never heard of the band before. My girls gave me the tickets for Christmas. And she was such a champion. She learned the words.
Oh,
she was singing along. She took all the photos. It was really funny. Yeah, she was fun to go with.
So is there a favourite, what's the name of the band again?
Rufus Du Sol.
Right. Is there a favourite Rufus Du Sol song?
Oh, a girl at the concert asked me this and I couldn't tell her because I just listen to it when I'm in the car and I don't look at the names of the songs. So I can't tell you. I know all the words.
All the words, that's right. Well, we'll get a good Rufus Du Sol song. Look, Barb, that you said it should be a 3-hour podcast, and perhaps it should be, but that has just been a really insightful dip into your world of communication. And I guess as the climate is changing controversially, but I don't know why it could be controversial, but there's going to be more of it, and particularly with the information and disinformation. So it's such a worry. Isn't
Thank
it?
you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful. Fun. Thank you. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.
You've been listening to a 102.7 FM Toowoomba original podcast. For more podcasts or to listen to live and local Toowoomba radio, please visit 1027.com.au or listen on iHeartRadio and Community Radio Plus apps.